Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my channel. This is the first of many videos in which I will be taking a look at green stuff and other modelling putties, sharing hints and tips and techniques and talking about how you can turn something like this into something like this. In today's video I just wanted to focus on green stuff itself and a couple of other putties like Miliput and brown stuff, and just take a look at how you know when your green stuff is fresh, how you know if it's getting a bit old and tired, what to do to store it correctly, and how to get the best out of your putty. And then I'll be looking at a few sculpting tools and basic things that you can use for sculpting, modelling and converting with a putty like this. The first thing that you will notice is I've got two types of green stuff here. They're exactly the same thing. One is very common and would be very familiar to people who have used green stuff before, who've purchased it. The other perhaps not so apparent. This is a tube of green stuff in stick form. It's exactly the same, it's just supplied separately. You've got the blue in one packet and the yellow in another, and they are supplied in a plastic tube or a stick. Now I bought this, I've not used it before, I've always used the ribbon, but I bought this because I want to give it a go. And also one of the common problems with green stuff when you're keeping it and storing it is where the blue part of the putty contacts the yellow part of the putty, you will get a chemical reaction between the two and it will start to harden. I'll look at that in a second because that's a common problem with the ribbon. So I thought I'd buy a couple of sticks from Create here in the UK and see how I get on with those. So that is a to be continued. Most of you will be familiar with green stuff ribbon, and this is available in a lot of hobby stores through a lot of different modelling companies, miniature manufacturers and hobby stores. There was a period earlier in the year where there seemed to be a bit of fuss and concerns over fake green stuff. I was confused about that. I didn't enter into the discussion at all. I was just surprised to see how much talk there was about this for a very short period of time. Seemed to be a bit of a storm in a teacup, and I couldn't quite work out where it had come from or why it was even a topic of discussion. I'm not sure what I missed, but from my point of view, I couldn't understand, because it's not like green stuff is Chanel perfume or a Rolex watch or anything. It is an industrial putty that we happen to use in the modelling industry. So I was somewhat confused, and I don't know if that had arisen because there were so many different companies selling green stuff under their own brand. Maybe there was a bit of brand loyalty that got in the way or whatever, I don't know. But once upon a time, 15 years ago, I used to sell green stuff on eBay. I think I was probably one of the first people to do it and sell it in large quantities. In fact, I was selling so much of it that I originally was purchasing green stuff from Master here in the UK. I ended up approaching the manufacturer and buying it in bulk from the manufacturer and selling my own green stuff on eBay and online for a while. It didn't take long before other people saw that it was popular, it was going well, and it got very competitive very quickly, at which point I pulled out of the whole green stuff market and just focused on sculpting and writing and all the other things that I've done. Since then, I've gone back to Create to buy my green stuff because I know how the industry works. I know that, you know, in the UK, it's manufactured abroad, it's shipped into the UK, it goes to a company like Master who supply the trade. So they buy it in bulk, they split it up, and they sell it in smaller sizes at prices that normal people like you and me can afford. Some companies buy their green stuff from the trade supplier, and then they cut it into shorter lengths still, 6 inches, 12 inches, whatever, stick it in a blister, and it goes on a shelf or sits in a warehouse, and they sell it to the likes of you and me when we come along. We think, yes, I need a bit of green stuff for my converting. And unfortunately, green stuff doesn't keep very well for long periods of time, particularly in a shop environment. Anywhere where it's exposed to sunlight, ranges in temperature, air, anything like that can cause it to denature, to cure prematurely, to go off. This is why I get my green stuff from Sculpting, because I know their green stuff has not been sitting in a blister. It's in a sealed plastic tub like this, airtight container that keeps it fresh while they have it in stock. And then when I get it, the first thing I do is cut it into smaller lengths, make sure I keep the plastic wrapper that it comes in, I keep that on. I cut it into smaller manageable lengths, and then I stick it in the freezer. I have mentioned on previous videos that I've been using green stuff, some of which is 15 years old. This piece here is 15 years old, although it has been out for a few weeks in the air gathering dust. But I wanted to be able to show you how you can tell when the quality of your green stuff is starting to deteriorate. The first thing you'll notice when you buy fresh green stuff is quite plump. The edges are very straight, the sides to the putty, and also you can't really see very clearly on this, and it is already starting to join because I've had this out for a few weeks to do videos with and stuff. There is a tiny gap between the blue and the yellow putty, but at room temperature, sitting there, it slowly starts to creep, and these two will eventually make contact. So I'm going to get that into the freezer, and that one as well into the freezer as soon as I've done this video. Anyway, here is one that I took out of the freezer a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. This has been in my freezer for 15 years, and it's still in reasonably good condition. You can freeze it in an airtight container with the original wrapper on, no problems at all. If you cut it into small pieces, you can just pull out what you need. It will defrost in your hand within 30 seconds or a minute, and you can pull a bit off and mix it and work with it, and it's no problem at all. Even if you freeze the whole 36-inch roll, you can take it out of the freezer and you can snap it, break it, and just use it a bit at a time. So that's the first thing I would recommend, whether it's the top freezer in your fridge or whether it's a chest freezer in the utility room or a garage, big upright freezer, doesn't matter. Put it in an airtight container, cut it into strips and stick them in a zip seal bag, keep it in the freezer, and it will be good for decades. So once you've got your green stuff and you know it's fresh, you can smell it. If it's got a weird smell that's something between cookie dough and the rubber sort of plimsolls or trainers, you know it's fresh. If it doesn't have any smell at all, then you know it's been exposed to the air for a while and it's probably starting to deteriorate. This stuff, as I said, I've frozen for 15 years. I brought it out to do this video. I will be modelling with this very soon, but I also brought another piece out and left it out for quite a bit longer so that I can show you what green stuff looks like. And I've just dropped it on the floor, which is always fun. There. Right, this is what green stuff looks like when it starts to turn. Now, I have had some questions already based on previous videos I've done where I've mentioned green stuff, and there's a couple of things I want to show you here. I've pulled that and stretched it, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera here, it looks a bit lumpy. There are these little kind of weird rounded lumps that have formed, and that's exactly what they are. I don't know if I can stretch this a bit more just with my one hand. It is very sticky. It's like modelling with chewing gum. If I can bring this closer to the camera, where the two join, you will start to get a reaction over time. And that is typical of green stuff ribbon or tape. You can see, and those bumps there are basically lumps of blue stuff, the blue part of that, which have started to react with the yellow and go hard. So this green stuff here, if I mix it up, it will end up with bits in, hard lumps that won't disappear. You'll have to pick those out. The other thing that I wanted to show you, just while I try and clean that off my fingers, is the edge of the yellow there where it's been stretched. I don't know if you can see, it looks like there's a skin on it that started to crack and break, and that is another problem as green stuff starts to degrade. And it will do that sitting in a blister on a shop shelf, and no one will know. You'll buy it, you'll spend your hard-earned money on it, you'll get it home, you'll pull it like I've done to break a bit off, and you'll find there's a skin on the yellow side and there's these hard lumps where the two join. That's perfectly normal. It's just not nice when you've spent money on it, because it means your green stuff is getting old before you've even got it out the packet. And that is another reason why I buy mine from Sculpting. Now, they're not sponsoring me to do this. I don't work for them. I don't have any association with them other than the fact that I know when I buy green stuff from them, it is in good condition, and I'll get it in the freezer straight away. And then I don't have to worry about some of the problems that you can encounter if you actually buy green stuff that's been sitting on a shelf in a blister pack or whatever. As I said, sunlight will degrade it, changes in heat, room temperature from warm to cold to warm to cold. Over time, that will degrade it, and exposure to the air will also cause it to degrade. So that's the first thing. Buy it fresh, buy it ideally in a sealed container like this, and then stick it in the freezer. Cut it into lengths, stick it in the freezer, and it will last you decades. In terms of the Green Stuff brand itself, well, Green Stuff is a generic name because obviously this is a blue-yellow epoxy putty, and that's a bit of a mouthful. You will see if you buy it from Sculpting, it's called Original Duro. Years ago when I was purchasing it, it was known as Kneadertight Duro, and then Green Stuff, so it's had several names. I've got some old packaging here to show you, and this is from Brown Stuff, which is very similar to Green Stuff, and this is 15-20 years old. So this is Kneadertight Brown Neutral Epoxy Putty Tape. So the Brown Stuff used to come in smaller quantities, it was more expensive, and again, this has come out of the freezer. I will put it back in the freezer after I've done this video. I'm just looking to see if I've got any hanging around. I have. So that's the pack that the Brown Stuff used to come in. I know these days you can buy larger quantities of it, and it has sort of gained some popularity. It's very much like Green Stuff. It's quite sticky, quite messy. You mix it together, but once you mix Green Stuff together, it's like working with chewing gum. Brown Stuff is more like cookie dough once you mix it together. And the key difference, apart from the colour between the two, is that once Green Stuff goes hard, once it cures and once it dries, it's flexible, it's springy. Whereas Brown Stuff, if you mix Brown Stuff and roll out a thin piece and let it go hard, the Green Stuff would flex. If you did that, the Brown Stuff would snap. So brittle isn't the right word because it's still fairly tough, but it will snap, it won't bend. So Green Stuff has give in it when it's cured and is flexible. Brown Stuff is crisper. You cannot file or carve or chisel Green Stuff at all. It's the kind of putty that you have to use whilst it's wet and build it up. Brown stuff can be sanded down, it can be scraped, filed and chiseled, carved quite easily when it's dry. So there's two different characteristics there. As I said, the prices are different as well. Brown stuff has always been more expensive than green stuff. In terms of the price, at current prices today, I picked up 36 inches of green stuff for somewhere around the £15 mark. Prices vary on the stick. They're more or less, quantities are more or less the same. I think you get a little bit more with the tape in 36 inches than you do with the sticks, but it's around the £15 mark. If you're buying it from a third party, from a hobby shop or a store, then you could be paying as much as 20 quid, and you risk it not being as fresh as it might be otherwise. So that's green stuff. That's the putty, and that's how you know if it's fresh or not fresh. What do you do if it isn't fresh? Well, you can't really sculpt a lot of detail or texture or surface texture without it causing you a lot of problems. I have here some I wouldn't even call them offcuts, various bits that have started to react and go hard. I mean, that is junk, that is rubbish basically. But what I tend to do, you can see here as well, this is Miliput. And again, I bought this from I actually bought this from a hardware store, and I think what had happened was maybe a packet or two had dropped down the back of a shelf. Someone had found it months later and stuck it back for sale, and because it was in a cardboard box, unsuspecting me bought it. And when I got it home, the hardness side, the sort of the blue-grey side of the Miliput had got this skin on, which is awful. Anyway, not the end of the world. You can mix all this together and you can pack out the middle of a big model, like something like this, where you're building a body. You can pack out the insides. You can use wire, foil, and save yourself some money by using offcuts of putty, and then save the good stuff for the surface texture, like I've done here with the work that I've started on the trousers of this particular giant. You can see the scale there. Anyone who plays Warhammer will recognise that miniature. That is 28mm. Anyone who collects old Citadel miniatures will probably recognise that very upset dwarf berserker, which I stuck on a giant mushroom of mine that I sculpted. So you can see how big I decided to go with this guy. And he's actually standing on a cork block. Again, there's an armature underneath, and I've used wire and all sorts, and I will discuss that in later videos. So I just want to keep this one tight and focused on putty. So that's green stuff and brown stuff. And as I said, I'm not sure where the rumours started with green stuff being faked. I've never experienced anything like that. I just know that a lot of people sell this green stuff. It all comes from the same manufacturer. In the UK, it'll come through Silmaster, Silcreate. You can buy direct from them. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be a massive order. So if you're in the UK and you want to get green stuff that's fresh, I thoroughly recommend it. But you can pick it up elsewhere from lots of well-known retailers, and you may or may not find that the green stuff is nice and fresh. I've, experienced problems when I've done that, whether it was a big company that was well known, whether it was a smaller company. So yeah, that's what I do. So there's the green stuff and the brown stuff. And as I said, it's sometimes known as original Duro ribbon. It's sometimes known as Needetite. It's sometimes known as green stuff. It's sometimes known as all three. Basically, it all comes from the same place as far as I'm aware. So now I want to just have a quick look at Miliput. Again, this is a common putty, probably a name that you've heard. I tend to mix my green stuff and my Miliput together, and that's why a lot of my models look this pale shade of green, because the more Miliput that I use, and I did here in the arms to keep them strong, and there's a patch there that I had some left over. You can see how light that is in comparison to this. That's probably 20% green stuff, 80% Miliput in the mix, whereas this is more like a 50-50 mix of green stuff and Miliput together. So different ratios of Miliput and green stuff will give you these different colors, and they have different qualities. Miliput is very much like clay when you mix it. Green stuff is like chewing gum when you mix it. If you mix the two together, you get something that's sort of in between. If you use Miliput on its own, you can actually smooth the surface down with water. It will start to go, as clay does, it will start to thin, and you end up with this very pasty slip on the surface that's generated by rubbing water onto the surface. If you're just mixing it as it is, it tends to be like clay, and there's no springiness in it. So if you're pushing and shaping it, you make a mark, it'll sink in straight away, and it won't spring back out. Whereas because green stuff is more like chewing gum, there is some bounce and some springiness, so slight marks tend to soften as the putty cures. So in a nutshell, that's the basic difference. Now here, this is standard Miliput, and that's the box for standard Miliput. That's the cheapest. Prices range from about £2.50 up to £3.50 for something like this. Prices for the terracotta Miliput, which is basically the same, but obviously terracotta in colour, and I will be looking at that in other videos. I do have here an abandoned project. This was actually made, this is an armature or a dolly. These are called dollies. This is a dolly that I made using terracotta Miliput mixed with a little bit of green stuff, and I will be looking at that in later videos, but that was an abandoned project. I've got other armatures here that I've made, or dollies that I've made using garden wire, and mixing the green stuff with Miliput to then basically shape the underlying form of the miniature. I don't solder my garden wire. When I join strips of wire for arms and legs, I use a bit of Miliput. I twist the wire together and then just secure it with a bit of Miliput to make sure it doesn't move. Nothing fancy, just regular garden wire, different lengths. So that's the basics for the putty. Again, the Miliput standard or terracotta, whatever colour you choose. They do white, silver, black. It's a bit more pricey, but I don't bother with those. This doesn't like exposure to the air, as I've previously mentioned. If you find that the blue half of your Miliput has got this kind of skin on, and it's old and it's starting to deteriorate. They've changed the packaging since I started sculpting with this. We've got these sort of cellophane bags now, which mean it's an airtight seal until you open it. Once you've opened it, you either need to use it quickly within a couple of weeks or get it in an airtight container. So I've been using Miliput since I was a teenager, so well over 40 years of experience using Miliput now. I've been using green stuff since I got into Warhammer for the second time, I think it was. So, and that's 25 years, maybe 30, but yeah, I've been using green stuff for 25 years. And so what I want to do over the course of the next few videos is share what I've learned, the experience that I've had, hints and tips on sculpting, and how to get the best out of your green stuff. I do talk about this in the modelling books that I've written. I've done one on sci-fi modelling, I've done one on fantasy figure modelling, and there are hints and tips in both of those books on converting miniatures and repairing miniatures using green stuff and things like that in your hobby. Finally, in this video, I'm conscious of time. I just want to talk about sculpting tools. Anyone who has bought a sculpting tool from a hobby shop, well-known hobby shop, in particular will recognize this design. And again, you could pay £5, £6, £7, £8 for a tool like this. This particular tool was one I picked up for 50p, and I bought quite a few of them because I like to hammer out the ends and file and shape the tool to suit my needs. So that's the first thing. There isn't a standard sculpting tool that you must use. You're sold one that looks like this for far more than you need to pay in most hobby stores. If you go online, even if you go to a car boot, you can normally pick up dental tools like this, and that's what this was. It was a dental tool. It cost me about 50p, and that is the sculpting tool that is sold to most of us. Now I've got here a selection of tools that I like to use, and I will talk in more detail over various videos about this, but I just want to show you the kind of thing that I use. So apart from the bog standard one, which isn't one of my favorites and I don't use very often, push those to one side, I did buy a set of dental tools, and I think it was probably about £5 for maybe 12 different tools. They all had different ends, and I bought several over the years. And what I've done with all these is basically hammer them down. I'll just show you here because it's handy. This is what I use to make my sculpting tools the way I want them. It's a record number 11, made in England. There we go. Anvil. Obviously, I don't know if it's a jeweler's anvil or what, but I picked that up at a car boot fairly cheaply. And I will just bash out my sculpting tools on those. I will file them down, I will smack them with a hammer, I will twist them, bend them, thin them to get the blade edge that I want for my sculpting. You can see which my favourite tool is because that's the one with all the green stuff on, and the Miliput. Now I used to clean these regularly, sit them in a carton full of Dettol for a few days and get all that to fall off. But recently I was sculpting something and I actually ended up rolling all that gunk across the surface to create a really cool skin texture. So I'm not so bothered now about cleaning those tools. Having said that, if they are clean, you can get tools with this kind of texture on. And again, I've rolled that grip across the surface to create some really lovely texture on some of my conversions and models. So dental tools, get yourself some dental tools. Also, you can get these clay shapers, these silicone clay shapers. They do plastic ones as well, but that's nice and flexible. I've got lots of these in different sizes and shapes. Here's a bunch of them here. Some of them, you've probably seen before. Others have got chisel tips. That one is incredibly weird. I don't use it very often, but it was an interesting shape to work with. And again, you can see the ones that I've used more often have putty built up on them. So we've got clay shapers, we've got dental tools. I also use tweezers from time to time to pull things out, to squash things. The tweezers that I've got here, the pointy tweezers here, they're great for modelling fur. If any of you have seen my other videos, you'll know Baldwin the Pious, who is actually up there on that shelf at the moment, awaiting an undercoat of paint. He's waiting to be primed. I use these tweezers to pull out the fur texture on his shoes. Other sculpting tools which are of interest, I've got this thing here, don't know what it is, but that's got a nice sort of ball end to it. You can buy purpose-made ball styluses. Ball stylus pens are sometimes called. They're just basically wooden handles with, I'm struggling to get this to focus, just a little ball on the end, but I will use something like that. This one I've got here, or even a brass nail from a picture hook hammered into the end of an old dead paintbrush. And that's how I sculpted the texture on these mushrooms here. Just use that to press in and create the mottled texture on the surface of these gigantic mushrooms, which are still available from the Battleforge website if anyone's interested. So yeah, don't be afraid to really have a go at using anything as a sculpting tool, just whatever. I've got, you know, metal tubes, bits of wire that are stuck in the end of paintbrushes. In fact, somewhere I've even got a paintbrush where all the bristles fell out there. And I just cleaned up the end, and you can press that into a bit of green stuff or a bit of modelling putty, and you end up with what looks like a round scale. So sculpting tools, anything goes. I even use old scalpel blades that are dull and no longer sharp, and you can use those to cut in texture and add these little, I don't know if you can see it there, these tiny little score marks that make fabric look old or battle worn. That's all done with a scalpel blade. In fact, I've even used slate, garden slate, to press textures into stuff like stone and what have you. So it really is a case of anything goes. So I'm reaching the end of the video now, but I did just want to run through the basics. You don't have to spend a lot of money on this. You don't have to go to a hobby shop or a craft store and pay crazy prices. Get yourself a good pair of side cutters, get yourself some garden wire, use the modelling putty to create your armatures. And I will be going through this in other videos, so don't panic if you're kind of new to the hobby and you think, you know, I can't do that. I was new to the hobby once as well, and the first piece of green stuff I bought filled me with terror because I had no idea how to use this sticky, weird stuff. And now I'm sculpting all the time, mostly out of fun and enjoyment. I've got lots of abandoned projects to show you as well. I've got lots of things I started and never finished. I think one of the best ways to learn is by looking at your mistakes. And I've made plenty, and I'm going to share them with you so you can all see the best and the worst of figure sculpting. This was a severed giant's head that I sculpted a year or two ago. Never finished it. Basically, I'm going to do a Slayer dwarf and have him standing on that giant's head, and then maybe that will end up in production somewhere. Who knows? But there's lots of things you can do. It's not all about sculpting miniatures. I've just done myself a little treasure chest there. And you can see how I've pressed into the putty there to create the keyhole. Other things I've done using sculpting tools to score in stone texture and wood texture, and then the rivets there, they were created by pressing in a tiny little bit of metal tubing to create that. So paintbrush that I showed you with the end drilled out, this one with the metal tubing, that's how you create that kind of texture. And then I've done 3 of these trapdoors in various sizes, and then of course if you see my other videos you'll remember this. This is a master that was actually built over a piece of brass sheet that was just bent into a shape to give me a dome. I sculpted that. That will be going to Ainsty Castings. That's one of the masters that they've purchased with the Battleforge ranges, so I will be sending that down to Ainsty. But I just wanted to show before it goes that that's the master and that's the resin casting, and of course the resin is available to purchase if you're interested. This is the same haystack that I converted in my Dead Man's Hand videos to make the hay on the back of a wagon there. So I've got lots of stuff to show you over the coming weeks and months, but really just wanted to do this initial sort of first look at putty, at green stuff, and how you know it's fresh, how you know when it's turning, how to keep it. And I can't stress enough, if you really do want to keep your green stuff fresh, stick it in the freezer, stick it in an airtight container and put it in the freezer. So that's it for this video. I'm conscious of time. I try and do short videos and they always end up much longer than I imagined they would be. I'm going to sign off for the rest of the evening. I've got other things I need to do. I'm also getting quite tired, but I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please smash that like button. In future videos, I'll be looking at building armatures using cork and wire to create the scaffolding that you need to sculpt off. I'll be looking at sculpting tools and how to use them. I'll be looking at how you stop the putty from sticking to your sculpting tools by keeping them damp. Various other techniques, all the things that you need to know in order to get the most out of this wonderful material. Thanks ever so much for your time. Please smash that like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.